This video is about Dere Street, that's D-E-R-E Street, which was one of the Roman roads leading up north. So it started as a quick exploration of a stone bollard with a plaque on it. It's travelled down many interesting pathways, and as it's taken much longer than I thought it was going to take, the videos had to be divided into several parts. So this is the first part, and it deals with the route north from sort of Neolithic man through the Romans and the Saxons until the Normans arrived with William Duke of Normandy. When I travelled from home going fishing down the River Swale, I passed a stone bollard. I must have passed it hundreds of times and often wondered what it was. It was between the old A1, which is now being renumbered, the 6055, and the new A1M, stuck on the end of an old piece of road. Anyway, one day a curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go and have a look. And it wasn't what I expected at all. And this is just a little bit of video about my the first visit when I went to see it. That is the A1M south of Leeming Bar. When you come down the old A1, or the next to old A1, there's a little gate here. I must have driven past this hundreds of times. And there's a little notice at the end there. I'm going to have a look and see what it says. Well, that's what it says. I thought it was going to be something more interesting. Just looking back from the plaque, this is the original A1 coach road before it was even dualled, let alone turned into motorway. And it goes over this old stone bridge which has a number on it, and it has been bridge 353 at some time. It's in very good condition. There's this lovely stone parapet, same on both sides. So there is the original Coach Road Bridge on the A1. Or in those days it was known as the Great North Road, London to Edinburgh. You can see the A1M behind that, and behind me is the old A1, which has been renumbered. So, it's a little bit of history before this thing disappears. I don't suppose many people know it's here. Anyway, after this first visit, this bridge intrigued me. How would it manage to survive the upgrade of the old Great North Road to the A1, and then from the A1 to when it was made into a dual carriageway, and then a further upgrade in 2012 when it became the A1M. And having started this investigation, well, it led down all sorts of alleyways, and to the amazing history of just 13 miles of the A1 from Dishforth up to Leeming Bar. What a fascinating piece of road this has been. I mean, as you travel along this piece of road, it's on a slight ridge. That's one of the things you notice as you're travelling along it. And you can see for miles in both directions, right away across to the Pennines in the west and across to the Cleveland Hills in the east. And if you look very closely towards the Cleveland Hills, you can see a white horse carved on a hillside, which must be, I don't know, 30 miles away. And it's been used for thousands of years, this little stretch. And all along its length, odd little bits of history have turned up from the Neolithic period and other very early times. And of course it's very close to the Thornborough Henges, which are sort of, I suppose, the equivalent of arenas, which you can see on the map on the western side of the road. And being on a ridge, when the whole area was forest and marshland, of course, it will have been a little bit drier. The Romans had conquered most of what was known of the world and decided that it was Britain's turn. They'd known about the wealth of Britain, how it had copper and tin and lead and grew very good crops. So in 55 BC, the Emperor Julius Caesar decided it was Britain's turn to come under the Roman cosh. And so he came across the channel with a smallish army, put the fear of God up everybody. But he didn't stay very long. The Gauls, who lived in northern France, were causing a bit of a stink, so he had to go back. He had to go back and sort them out. At this time, Britain was sort of divided up into tribal regions, and they were just knocking seven bells out of one another. Had little wars all over the place. There were no match for the Romans at all. And in 43 AD, the Romans returned with a vengeance. Which, I mean, this was nearly 100 years after the first invasion by Julius Caesar. And they took over the whole of the south of England. The northern border ran from sort of Bristol up to Lincoln. And it took about 30 years to get everybody whipped into shape, including that woman, leader of Britons in East Anglia, Boadicea, some people call it, but Boudica, the more intellectuals, seeped and neighbour. Anyway, once that was all done, once they'd got the south whipped into shape, the 9th Legion, they marched north to take on the Bolshoi Brigantes. They were the sort of predecessors of the Geordies. And in 71 AD they founded York, and roads were laid between London and York and other major Roman fortresses like Colchester and Exeter and Chester. And these roads were absolutely dead straight as far as possible, and they were paved. They were superb. And one of them ran north from York through Aldborough, Boroughbridge, and then onto Catterick. Following the line of this ridge, which had been used by these ancient tribes, and it became known as Dere Street. and obviously was a very important road leading to Scotland, which the Romans were having trouble with. It was a barbaric place and proving very difficult to conquer. Anyway, the upshot of it was the Romans decided it wasn't worth the light. It wasn't worth all the hassle, and so they built a wall across running along from Carlisle across to Newcastle or thereabouts, and it was built by the Emperor Hadrian, and of course we now know it as Hadrian's Wall, and much of it still remains. It was completed in 128 AD, and of course it had to be garrisoned to keep these marauding Scots from coming down and pinching stuff. And of course Dere Street was the main road leading up to it. And the other thing was that Dere Street itself had to be protected from the disenchanted Britons on either side, who didn't take kindly to Roman occupation. So they had forts stuck along it at sort of frequent intervals. And one of these was where Dere Street crossed Heel and Beck, not very far from here. And when they were building the A1M, before they built it, they carried out extensive excavations there, these archaeologist chaps, and found all sorts of stuff. And it was a sizable place. And of course the Romans who were garrisoned there, they had to be provided with food and horses and implements of all descriptions, and so a sort of thriving trading centre grew up there, as well as a manufacturing place where stuff was made. This next series of photographs shows the front piece of a very interesting book about all of this, with some nice photographs and a map. Anyway, by 400 AD there was a power struggle in Rome. The whole place was beginning to fall apart. The top men were all fighting for the top jobs, and eventually the Roman Empire began to disintegrate, and Roman troops were brought back from all corners of the empire to sort out the mess and to protect the more valuable parts of the empire, of which Britain wasn't one. As they pulled out, of course, opportunists saw this as their chance to grab a load of the spoils. It's a bit like the modern day Middle East. And there were invasions of heathens, as they were described, from Ireland and Wales and Scotland. And they caused absolute mayhem. And word got across to the northern continent, particularly the region which is now Germany. I mean, these were called the Dark Ages. And the Saxons came piling across, and they took the south of England, sort of ravaging it as they went. And then along came another lot called the Angles, who took over the north of England. And so there was much rivalry between the Angles and the Saxons about who was going to get what. at the end of it, England had been divided up into 7 kingdoms, of which we're familiar, like Wessex and Northumbria and other places, all ruled by sort of a king. And of course, they were all fighting one another, like dogs in a cage, over little bits of territory, or in fact larger lumps of territory, given the opportunity. Now, most of the British, the original Britons, they didn't want to get involved in all of this, and they'd all done a runner. Most of them had fled to Ireland and Wales and Scotland, which was probably very wise, leaving the whole place to these foreigners. And as if that wasn't bad enough, along came the Vikings. They were a rough, tough lot. They landed in East Anglia, and they ravaged the whole place between 787 and 878 AD. They didn't take prisoners. But eventually, the most powerful of these ancient kings, a chap we've all heard of, Alfred the Great, he was supposed to burn some cakes. I hope people know that. I have no idea. And he decided to take these Vikings on, and was very successful. And the Vikings were forced out of the south of England, and their main stronghold was in the north. And if you visit York, of course, there is an exhibition there of when the Vikings lived there, a sort of underground exhibition called Jorvik. It's quite interesting. The legacy the Romans has left: superb roads, bridges, forts, sort of culture, coins, money. Good governance, rule of law, big posh houses and villas, palaces, had all gone. And all places was a bit of a shambles. Anyway, Alfred the Great became King of all England. Alfred the Great died in 899 AD, and the throne passed from various people, but ended up with a chap called Edward the Confessor, an ancestor of Alfred's, and he died in 1066, a very significant date in English history or British history. Edward had no kids, which was a major problem, because 3 other people thought that they were the rightful heirs of Edward for various reasons, which I won't really go into here. All sorts of promises had been made in the past, which certainly weren't going to be kept. And these 3 were, the first one was a chap called Harold Hardrada. The name's enough to frighten you, but anyway, he was King of Norway. And then there was the most powerful of the British lords, a chap called Harold Godwinson. And he was supported by sort of Knights of England, for want of a better word. I suppose later on it would be the aristocracy, but he was the most powerful of all the knights. And the third fella was the Duke of Normandy. Now the English aristocracy decided to get this Harold Godwinson crowned quickly before anyone else had the chance to grab the throne. So he was crowned King Harold. Word got round that the English ruling class had crowned this fella Harold, and King Harold Hardrada of Norway and William, the Duke of Normandy, they took the hump. They weren't impressed with this at all. And the first off the mark was Harold Hardrada. He assembled a fleet of about something like 230 odd boats, piled his army into them, set off across the North Sea, sailed up the Humber, and captured York. And he was there for quite a long time. Because of course in those days, word used to take went at the speed of a horse. So the newly crowned King Harold of England, he got wind of this invasion by Harold Hardrada, and he rushed north, gathering an army as he went along. I suppose it was a bit like conscription. He didn't get much choice, and he had a sizable army by the time he got to York. And the Norwegian army was outside York at a place called Stamford Bridge, which is on the River Derwent. And he caught them by surprise there and gave them a real good thrashing. Most of them were slaughtered and left behind, and of these 230 odd boats that set off from Norway, only 23 went back with the survivors. So that was Harold out of the scene, and that took place on the 24th of September in 1066. In the meantime, William, the Duke of Normandy, in France, he'd assembled a massive army, shipped them all across to England. So he was camped in the south of England. So they arrived on September the 28th, which was only 4 days after the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And Harold left some of his troops in the north of England, just to make sure there was going to be no further trouble. And got wind on his way back that this William had arrived, this William, Duke of Normandy, who wanted his throne, was camped down south somewhere. And so he had to rush south with the remnants of this army he'd assembled on the way north. And the march to about 25 miles a day was a lot. It was quite a long way, particularly in bad weather. And when he got down to London, he had a week off, just to sort what he was going to do. At the end of the day, there was nothing for it. He had to take this fella on, this William. He had to take him on. And on the 14th of October, Harold's army took on William's army at Hastings, near the on the south coast. And unfortunately, he was beaten, and even worse, he was killed. William, now the Conqueror, he brutally put down any objections to his kingship and was duly crowned William I of England. And he divided his kingdom up amongst all his cronies, all the people who had come across and provided arms and men and ships and provisions, you name it, from France. They all got a slice of England. Some got an enormous slice and some got relatively smaller. They built castles and they ruled their little bits of England with rods of iron, usually hammered into spears and clubs and maces and chain mail and whatever it took to subdue the inhabitants. Most of those who were originally British, they again decided to do a runner. The prospect of having to live under these brutal Frenchmen was not for them, and most of them fled down to the Mediterranean and hired themselves out as mercenaries, particularly to the Byzantine Empire, which was sort of based on Turkey and surrounding parts. And this little photograph which I took on Crete seems to suggest that some of their ancestors are still out there. So, in 1069, which was only 3 years after William had arrived, there was a big rebellion in the north of England. Some of the relics of the Danes who'd stayed on following their defeat by William, and there were other disenchanted beings. They killed one of William's lords, a fellow called the Robert de Comines. Comines is a sort of town, I think it's near Belgium, on the Belgian-French border now. And this upset William no end, and he sent a force north to deal with it. He laid waste to the whole place. Everything was killed, everything was destroyed. The whole place became a sort of wilderness, a desert. Everything north of the River Tees. And all place was what was called waste for years and years and years. If you're still with me, you haven't switched off yet. Dere Street, like all Roman roads, was now just a remnant. It was a muddy track, and it stayed like that for over 500 years, getting worse and worse and worse. Travel around William's kingdom was terrible. And at the end of it, most of it had just disappeared. Everybody who was travelling just travelled on horseback through tracks in the forests from place to place, and there were wild times. I mean, most towns had a curfew, and if you weren't, and when the curfew bell tolled, the gates of the town were closed, and if you weren't inside, then you were left outside to sort of marauding bandits and thieves who just rob you blind, pinch your horse and leave you dead by the side of the track. So they were frightening times.